Well, what's up, Preaching While Black fam? Listen, I got a great episode, this particular episode. I'm sitting down with my friend, Christopher J. Harris. He's a pastor in the Tampa area. And if I could characterize this man by one word, it would be wisdom. I'm looking forward to gleaning from that wisdom. We'll see you guys on the other side.
Welcome to the Preaching While Black podcast, a podcast dedicated to the calling, craft, and content of the Black preaching tradition. And now, here's your host, John C. Richards Jr.
Pastor Harris.
What's up, man?
What's cracking, man?
What's going on, brother?
Man, listen, I've been waiting for this for a long, long time, my brother. Long time.
I'm so honored to be on. And, it's one thing when you hang out with people and you can talk to people and have funny text messages and all that stuff. It's another thing when your friends trust you for a few minutes on their platform. And so I know we're friends in real life, but I'm honored to be on with you, brother.
Yeah, no problem at all, man. Listen, I know you're a native of Palatka, Florida. You have served in various capacities and pastoral capacities. Currently, you're at the Crossover Church where you serve as the COO and the executive pastor there in Tampa, Florida. We're going to talk about that context in a few minutes here. But you've also served on staff at a church in Chicago, the Chicago area, a very well-known Black church in the Chicago area. Yeah. And you also now serve as the Director of Administration for Full Gospel International Bible Fellowship. Did I get that right?
Almost. Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship International.
Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship International. Yeah. It's the Full Gospel folks. Yeah. We love the Full Gospel folks. They are Baptist-costal through and through, and we love them to death. So let's go ahead and dive into your call, man. The call to ministry for a lot of people takes different shapes and different forms. Growing up in Florida, Florida's kind of a hotbed here over the past several years. When did you start to begin that call to ministry?
Yeah.
Man?
So, interestingly enough, man, I actually accepted my call to preach when I was 10 years old. And I preached my first sermon when I was 12. And some people may look at that and doubt that, but obviously here we are decades later and I'm still preaching the gospel. So there's not much you can doubt there, right? But anybody that knows me from childhood, my family, people that lived in my neighborhood, people that were a part of my church, they will tell you that I was absolutely, I'm talking about, I can remember being 4 and was absolutely spellbound and mesmerized by preachers and preaching, to the degree that when I was home, when other kids were outside playing hide and go seek, I was in my house with a bathrobe that my mom had bought me, and that was my preaching robe. And I had taken, this might be sharing too much, but this is what we do, right? I had taken, when you go to the dry cleaners, you have those hangers that have for your pants that have the little white thing on the bottom that your pants hang on. I had
yes, sir.
And broke it in half, took it off the hanger, broke it in half, and taped it together, and that was my microphone. And I would actually
So you rigged it. I rigged it up,
bro. I rigged it. And so I would preach for hours. And obviously there's some element of childlike innocence to that and just kind of playing around. But then there was an element where there was a lot of truth in that moment for me. Fortunately, the pastor that I was serving under at that time was also a teenage preaching prodigy. And I remember sort of having a Samuel Eli kind of moment, probably not to the depth of Samuel, but I remember being at home and thinking at 10, like, you're supposed to be preaching. And, at one point you're thinking, okay, well, I'm just out here playing, but it sat on me, bro. The best way I can describe it is that it sat on me. It literally, like, it was almost like I couldn't do anything else until I honored or paid attention to this gnawing that was in my heart, that was, in my soul. I don't think I had language to really describe it at that point, but I just knew like in my knower. I heard a preacher say that phrase one time, in my knower, like I knew like this was something I needed to pay attention to. And I'll never forget, I was scared, like the heebie-jeebies, man. I was nervous, and all of that. And I remember going to my pastor and explaining to him what I was feeling. And he kind of laughed. And he said, okay, I want you to specifically go and pray and ask God if you're supposed to preach. And so I did, and went back to him. He told me to come back to him by a certain time, and I did. And he said, okay, well, if this is what you feel, here are the steps that you're going to have to take to do that. And the best way I can describe that process was preaching hazing.
Wow. Yep. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
there's a hazing that goes on in the preaching call.
Bro,
for
listen.
Sure.
When I pledged my fraternity, that I told him that was easy because I'd been ordained by a Baptist church. You can't get more online than that.
Listen to me.
So,
so you had a woe that was consummate with your call. Like there was a man, like Paul said, woe is me if I don't preach the gospel. Then you had somebody come alongside you to shepherd you through that. What was that like?
Yeah. So it was a season of asking a lot of questions. It was a season of a lot of learning, a lot of serving. At the time I was also playing the drums for the church. And so what's interesting, obviously God crafts our call in very unique ways. My pastor was very hard on me. Now, let me give you some context here. Smaller town. My town is not a big town where I'm from. And he was very well known, and to the degree of, people in town. He was at the time when I accepted my call, he was on city council for the city, but he was also one of the most popular funeral directors. He also worked a full-time 9-to-5 job, and he was now pastoring one of the largest churches in town. And at that time, you're talking about 400 or 500 people, which that's a big church. 500 people in a Baptist church in a small town. That's a big church, right? And eventually he became mayor of my hometown. And we're not a predominantly African American town, so that was a big deal. And so I say all that to say that he was incredibly hard on me. He was also my cousin. Okay. But I never addressed him as my cousin. My primary relationship with him was pastor. Even to this day, I'll call him and he'll say, "Hey, cousin." I say, "Hey, pastor." I'm just not. I'm not. I know
just honorific,
yeah,
man.
I know he's family, but I recognize the lines of demarcation here, and I recognize that he helped to birth ministry in me. So he was very hard on me, man. I remember asking him one time, because there were other people that accepted their call to ministry as well around that time, and even a guy that was he was older than me, but he was probably at that time maybe 17 or 18. And I remember asking, "Pastor, why are you so hard on me? You're not hard on Dwayne. You're not hard on anybody else like this. Why are you so hard on me?" And he said, "You'll appreciate it later." That was his response. I'll never forget it. He's like, "You'll appreciate it later." I remember, because of course at that time, everybody wants to preach on Sunday. If you're a preacher, you want to get your opportunity to preach on Sunday. And I'll never forget Pastor John. He came to me one day and we met, and he said, "For the next year, I'm not going to let you preach on Sundays, and it's not a punishment. I'm only going to let you teach Bible studies." And at the time, I was like, "What?
Why do we feel like that's less than, though? Why do folks feel like that's less than Sunday
Well,
morning?
let's just be honest. The average church, the same number of people are not attending Bible study as they do on Sunday. Number two, generally speaking, people are in their Sunday's best. There's a certain level of prestige that comes with preaching on Sundays. You got visitors that are there, and you're generally, if you're inviting friends to church, you're inviting them to Sunday. You ain't inviting them to Wednesday night or the Bible study. And, you got the choir and you got the music. And, if you're going to preach at that time, you had to hoop. You did not preach if you didn't hoop. So you had to hoop, right? Which I'll talk about maybe later on if we get to that. But there was a certain mystique around it. And so he said, I just feel led. You're not going to preach on Sundays for the next year. You're only going to be able to teach Bible studies. And I remember there were adults. I would be sitting in. So we had Bible study on Wednesday nights. We also had a youth Bible study that was happening simultaneously. And growing up, I never attended the youth Bible study. Now, on Sundays, I attended the youth Sunday school class, but on Wednesday nights, I was always in the adult Bible study. And he would like call me out. Like as he was teaching Bible studies, he would call me out and say, okay, what do you think about this? What does this text say about this? What does this mean? And this is in front of adults. And if you know anything about adults, and particularly older Baptist people, if you get something wrong about the Bible, they're going to rebuke you openly. That is not what the Bible says, son.
Without hesitation.
Without hesitation, brother. And you're gonna have to get that right. One of the most pivotal moments in my ministry journey was in my hometown. All of the Baptist churches, we taught the same Sunday school lesson every Sunday. We taught out of the forget what Sunday school commentary, I think is what it was called. And every Baptist church in town, and at the time there was probably maybe 21 or 22 Baptist churches, they would all the Sunday school superintendents and all the Sunday school teachers would get together on Tuesday night to go over the coming Sunday's lesson. And so they would actually have a teacher that would teach, and they call this the Sunday school forum. So you'd probably have, I don't know, man, 50 or 60, Sunday school superintendents, Bible study teachers, Sunday school teachers that are in this class, this Sunday school forum. And they would rotate every 3 months, every quarter to different churches, just so it wouldn't be at one church every time. I was 15 years old and got selected to teach the Sunday school forum. And this was a big deal because obviously, first of all,
no pressure.
Huh?
No pressure.
Right, right. I was the youngest in the room. Many of these people, I mean, you had people like, I know Deacon James W. Roberts Sr. Of course, he's gone on to be with the Lord. He had been a Sunday school superintendent 50 years. Okay. You got, so many other people, Mother A.B. Benjamin, who, at that time probably was in her mid 70s, and she had a photographic memory. So she would read the Bible and just bam, 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 bam. One of the churches that I attended, Dr. Matt King Carter would do revivals at this church every summer. If you know anything about Dr. Matt King Carter from South Florida, another preacher par excellence he had a photographic memory. He was like Dr. Ralph West. He never went to the pulpit with any notes. He never went to the platform, with anything. He had a small Bible that was probably like this right here. He would open up the Bible, read his text, close it, and then preach just like that, never looking down. And I'm talking about, we were doing 7-night revivals at the time. So you got 7 nights where he's just going, right? So anyway, there were people like this in the Sunday school forum, and it was probably one of the most pivotal moments in my ministry career because it forced me to learn the word. And when I got done with that year, one of the things my pastor said to me was, he said, a lot of people can preach, but not everybody can teach. And if you're going to be a part of one of my products, so to speak, that's not the word he used, but I just said that just now. He said, I want anybody that comes out of me to be able to always teach. Now, if you ain't ever called to preach, they'll never doubt that you're called to teach. Now, everybody that was a part of our class, so to speak, or a part of our cadre was not called necessarily to teach, to be actually a teacher in the body of Christ, but it's unapologetically, unequivocally one of my callings is to teach the gospel. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background.
That's good, man. That's something that we're going to get into in terms of the way you approach preaching, but it's good to kind of track that journey of your call to ministry. Now, we're going to take a break here real quick, but I want you to quickly tell me, if you were sitting there watching Pastor Harris's first sermon as someone in the audience, what is one piece of advice that you would give to him?
Slow down. Slow down.
That's good.
Yep. I preached that message so fast. Yeah, you just don't. I was so nervous that I just went so fast. So I would tell him to slow down.
That's good, man. All right, so we're going to take a move from your call to ministry to the craft of your preaching. Should be good. We'll see y'all on the other side of the break.
Scholars have referred to the original black church as the invisible institution because enslaved people were often not allowed to worship freely. They'd have to gather, sing, and preach in secret to avoid being beaten. Yet they still developed a deep devotion to the authority of Scripture and the liberation narrative. Today, many Christians who don't fully agree with conservatives or progressives feel invisible. They're not well represented in politics or mainstream media. In response, the AND campaign has created the Invisible Institution newsletter, or IVI. We'll be providing political commentary, policy breakdowns, and more for Christians who believe in social justice and moral order, not one or the other. Go to andcampaign.org and subscribe if you're sick and tired of feeling invisible.
All right, Pastor Harris, listen, this is probably one of my favorite parts because I know you're a systems guy and I'm a systems guy too. We both like systematically approaching things, and part of that is the preaching task itself. We both talked about how we approach putting together a sermon. So I want to hear from you, and we could probably do an hour on this, but I want to just hone in on one particular piece of your system, and that is retention. You know, as pastors in the study, we work through text, and then a lot of pastors get frustrated because they're like, man, I just preached this about 3 years ago, but I can't find the notes anywhere. What do you do as a pastor to help you to be able to retain and also recall some of the information that you gleaned from various resources?
Yeah. So keyword searches. So first of all, I have I on purpose have a very, very organized filing system in my computer, my folders. I use folders, and so I've got a folder for obviously for my sermons, for my speeches, for presentations, consulting, whatever that I'm doing. Almost every message that I preach has a PowerPoint associated with it. So even how I name those files are very important. If there's a message that I preach, somewhere at the bottom of that message, at the end of it, I will preach. I will indicate where I preached it at, the date that I preached it. If it was for a particular event, what that event was for. I mean, there's a few sermons that I've preached in multiple places at different times, and so you'll look at that document and you'll see 3 or 4 times where I preach it in different ways, in a different context. Or there have been times too where depending upon the text that you preach, you may be able to take different elements from different sermons that was around that text, around those ideas, and sort of do a mashup, if you would. I never have an idea that I don't document. So if I'm freestyling, meaning that I'm out and about somewhere, first of all, I always have a notepad with me. Now this is just coincidence. I was working through the narrative of Luke 19 with Zacchaeus. And so I will take this, or actually I've already done it, but I literally write the text out, but I will take this and scan it into my folder. I have a folder that says notes for sermons, sermon notes. And so I'll tag that in there. Once I scan it in, again, I'll put, keywords in there, Luke 19, Zacchaeus, et cetera, et cetera. And so then I'll be able to go back and refer to that and that kind of thing. I've got Bibles.
And those notes are your personal observations of the text prior to turning to any other commentaries or resources, right? So you're just looking at the text, gleaning.
So I literally will write out the narrative, right? So this is verses 1 through 10. I wrote it out. I've got a bag of pens with different colors in here that I keep with me, and so I'm different colors mean different things. One color is for basically nouns, so people, places, things. Other one is for key phrases, verbs, action words, whatever. If that sucker gets read, it's gonna end up in the sermon at some point.
So red means it's hot.
Listen.
Hey, so here's the crazy thing about what you just said. So I do something very similar, but I do it in my iPad, right? So I take the sermon text from Logos, I'll copy and paste it into a PDF, and then I use my Apple Pen to be able to do that same annotation, so that I'm not necessarily scanning the paper copy, but there is something about writing a text out that really is helpful as well. So I like that particular approach. Now let's talk about your exegetical piece though. Like, so how, after you go through that piece, what is your exegesis? And this is a preaching podcast, so most people know what exegesis is, but this is what reading into the text or reading out of the text, what it means historically, culturally, literally, in terms of the literary context. So what does your exegesis look like?
Yeah. So, and I recognize that every preacher does things differently. So this is my process, right? And just kind of it's working for me right now. Dr. West, or some of these other preachers that you've had on here. I saw Dr. John Faison, my brother, he was on here too, and some of the others. They probably they could probably rebuke me for this later on, but for right now, this is working for me. But man, I stare at the text for a few days, sometimes a few weeks. Very rarely have I preached something over the course of my preaching time that I haven't looked at for a few weeks. Very rarely. I can probably count on one hand how many times there was a text that I saw, or just a couple times, or within a few days, and then I preached that text. That's just not how God generally works with me. I'm not saying that that's not how God works. There's some preachers that I've seen them do it, and I'm just spellbound by it. But for me, I stare at the text. I mean, I gotta, like this Luke 19 passage, I don't have anywhere right now that I'm designated to preach that on, but there was a statement that was made in a session that I was in, a meeting that I was in, and it just, bam, it sat on me, right? It hit me. And so immediately the Luke 19 passage came to mind. And so when I had some time to sit down with it, I just kind of sat down with it. I wrote the narrative out, and there was a phrase. Here's a free sermon for somebody. There was a phrase, a lot of people, it's easy to focus on Zacchaeus and him being short and short of stature and, all that stuff. People that have preached that before probably worn that out. But I don't know that I had ever really seen or emphasized the notion of the text saying he wanted to see Jesus. When you study that text out, it actually infers not just that Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus, but he wanted Jesus to see him. He wanted to be seen by Jesus, right? He wanted to be known by Jesus. And so we could tease that out if we wanted to. So all of that to say that I spend some time, I stare at the text from all different kinds of angles, and I'm making notes. I'm thinking about phrases, what questions are coming to mind. Now here's a small private hack for me, and I know we got to move quickly on this. I apologize if I'm unpacking this too slowly, but I never leave this moment in my process without thinking about what questions are my kids asking about this text if I read it. And part of that is because of their personalities, how they're wired differently. And I never want to preach a message that I don't think they can walk away with saying, okay, I got, I'm also, what does my wife think about? My wife and I are different in terms of how we see things. So what questions is my wife thinking about? I may start thinking about people in our church, certain challenges they may have. If we've got a member where a family member committed suicide, or somebody that just got a divorce, or, somebody that's literally laying in the hospital, I know they're going to be watching this as they're in the hospital online. So I'm thinking about the questions that they're going to ask and what they may walk through. And then I'm going to then go towards, at that point, starting to actually do some of the excavating. So then let's look at some of the Greek and the Hebrew, the Aramaic. Let's look at some of the commentaries, some of the original context of this narrative, that kind of thing. Here's the other thing that I started doing maybe about 6 years ago, is intentionally trying to listen for diverse voices in the conversation about the narrative. So I may, at that point, go on YouTube and just Google, a phrase or something or a text, and then type sermon, and just kind of scroll to see if there's a person that's of a different race or different gender or different background than me. What are they saying about the text? And at this point, I'm still just making notes, and all of this is just raw notes that I'm making. So I'll stop there because that's sort of the back end process before I actually get into the formal, actual organization and development of the message.
That's good. So we're gonna move into our content session, but I want to just talk about the craft just for a few more
Okay.
minutes and ask you about a few of your tangible resources that you can provide for pastors who are out there who are looking for resources. So if you had to give me top 3 resources that Pastor Harris uses, what are your top 3 resources?
It's going to be a physical Bible because I need to write in it. It's going to be my Logos Bible software. Fortunately, we're at a place where we can make an investment in that, and I recognize the price point that goes along with that. So everybody may not, be able to have access to that level of a resource. There are some cheaper and freer alternatives that you probably find online, but obviously, in this context, this is our full-time occupation. So you make an investment, in those resources. I would then say, can the internet be a third tool or no?
It can, but that's like saying Bill Gates' internet, man. It's like really nebulous. You know what I mean?
Here's why.
So you got to give me something.
No, but here's why I say that though, because for me, as I'm walking through my preparation process, if I can find images or quotes from the internet, that shows or conveys what I'm trying to convey here, then I would use that to help push the point. But if you don't want me to use the internet, I'll say the third tool is my Evernote, because I've got so.
No, I'm not mad at you, man. That's good for illustrations, quotes. I understand what you're saying, but Evernote's gonna be a winner. So go ahead, let's hit this Evernote.
So Evernote, I use Evernote because I've got multiple folders in there with I joined Evernote in the beta form when Evernote was a beta app. That's how long I've been like a paid subscriber of Evernote. So I got years and years and years, hundreds, if not thousands, of notes from sermons, notes from passages, all kinds of things in there. So I'm constantly will probably reference that, and I have a very, very healthy tags system in my Evernote. So there's very few subjects in there that I can't go pretty quickly and find based on those tags. So those would be the three resources that I would use.
Perfect, man. Listen, we don't have time for the Logos piece, but I think that some pastors do need to know that there is a free version of the software that includes over 70 resources, including word study software. So I definitely would commend that to anyone who's looking for something that is a software program to help you that's free. It's pretty user-friendly, and I'll be doing some trainings on that later. So thank you for bringing that up, Pastor Harris. We're going to move on to the content and the context of your preaching in the next segment. Looking forward to it. We'll see you on the other side. What's up, Preaching While Black fam? Listen, I hope this interview has been a blessing so far. If you want more content and resources around Preaching While Black, go over to our YouTube channel, Preaching While Black. We have all the episodes from our interviews up, but we also have other resources for you as a Black preacher as you try to hone your craft, your call, and your content for Black preaching. Now back to our episode. All right, so let's talk about the content and the context of your preaching, man. You have been an executive pastor in both the Black church context and now in a multicultural church context. You mentioned this earlier. This is a spoiler alert, but I want to talk about hooping with you, man, because as Black preachers, both of us are not hoopers. And I think that when we go into other contexts, sometimes people think that we're going to be something that is a caricature of the Black church. And the hooping tradition is an amazing tradition in the Black church. There are pastors who out there who do it well and who are able to convey the message. But Pastor Harris, both you and I know that we are not hoopers. So I want to talk to you about that in the context of your preaching. What does hooping mean to you personally? And then how have you kind of landed in your own preaching sweet spot, even without having to do that as a Black preacher, even if expectations are set upon
Yeah.
you?
Let me clarify just really fast, Pastor John. I can hoop. It's just not my sweet spot. Like
I got you.
I can do that if I had to. It's just not my sweet spot. Yeah. When I was growing up and started preaching, you had to, and that's the part I didn't like. That it felt forced. It felt mandatory, and to use our preaching phrase, I want to be able to go get it if it's there. If it's not there, I don't want to be able to feel forced to do that. Preaching is celebration. Preaching is celebration. It is the icing on the cake. It is, man, we've gone on a journey together, and we've gotten to a place now where this trip has become so good that everybody's just like, yeah, like, let's go, right? And so that to me is what the hooping is. And so if you've not fed people, if you've not taken people on a journey, if you've not given people an intellectual experience, an emotional experience during the message, if you've not given them some steak and oxtails and potatoes, then don't try to just hoop, because now you're leaving people unfulfilled. And so that to me is what the hooping is. It is man, we've been on a journey, and we are leaving with a euphoric moment now where we get a chance to celebrate what we just experienced.
That's good, man. So let's talk about your context. You're in
Yeah.
Tampa. You're in the state of Florida. That many people, including Black preachers, want to go ahead and just saw Florida off the bottom of Georgia and let y'all just float on down the river. But this is a reality for you as a Black preacher in a multicultural congregation, many of whom who may have different political, social views from you, possibly. How do you approach that when you're preaching on issues that touch on social issues where everyone might not agree?
The conviction is to not be a loyalist to a party, but to be a loyalist to the text. What does the text say? What does Scripture say? And so we have unapologetically taken the stance that Jesus and justice go together, that Jesus has often been for those that have been voiceless or oppressed, the least, the lost, and the left out. And so with whatever the issue is, how do we then address this? Now, if a person is primarily discipled by Fox and MSNBC and CNN and whatever else, they're going to have a hard time at our church. Because if they've been discipled by those things, then they are putting their truths over the truth of Scripture. And so they'll struggle at our church. We unapologetically, very intentionally, very prayerfully, we run towards the hard topics and talk about it. We don't avoid it, right? And that's countercultural. We walk in wisdom, don't get me wrong, but we're not afraid of how people are going to respond if it's the Bible. Because if you have an issue, now we do it in love, we do it in grace, we make sure that we package it right, because sometimes it's not even the message that the church preaches, it's the way that we deliver it or the way that we package it that's the problem. But as long as we feel like we've walked in wisdom with that and preached the truth, then your issue is not with us, your issue is with the Bible, and we kind of go from there. So.
Now, family is very important to you, bro. So I want to talk with you a little bit about balance as we finish our session here. How do you properly balance your home life with your preaching life when sometimes those margins come together and they bleed together?
You said sometimes or regularly?
Some instances. I'm trying to be gracious.
Okay. Well, first of all, you got to marry the right person. That's the first thing. Like, let's not even sugarcoat this. If you marry somebody that doesn't understand the rigors of preaching, if they're fascinated by what they see on the pulpit, but they don't know who you are, they don't know your rhythm, they don't know your personality, people are surprised at this. I am myself. I'm actually an ambivert, but many pastors are not extroverts. And so the people that have to deal with their public reality, that is them being on in public, but then probably having less to say in private, is the family, is the husband or the wife. I'll never forget, me and my wife, we were dating at the time, and she went with me on this preaching engagement. And at the time, we're still learning each other, and we got in the car, and we got into an argument in the car. Let me tell you what my wife said. you ain't going to be talking to all these people and then ain't got nothing to say to me in the car. That's what she said, right? Man, listen. And so we got into an argument because at that time she didn't understand that I'm able to do that, but I'm completely drained when I finish. Like I have no more words. So obviously now we're, 20 plus some years in. And so she knows how I'm wired. She knows my rhythms and, all those kinds of things. So we don't control when the ideas actually start flowing. So we've been working on this text for 3 days or 4 days, and we got writer's block or creative block. And then all of a sudden it's 11 o'clock and then the ideas start flowing. You want to go to bed, but you're like, no, because it's hot right now. Right. And so just being able to get into that rhythm. But I think scheduling things. So, man, we operate in our family by a schedule. We over communicate everything. We talk a week in advance about what's coming down the line and, all of those things. My wife and my kids already know, like, if I got to preach this Sunday, daddy's probably going to have a little bit of a different rhythm than I would normally if I don't have to preach that Sunday. But I am over involved on purpose so that I'm constantly making deposits so that when I need to make a withdrawal, our account is not in the negative from a family standpoint. So, man, my kids can probably count on one hand how many times I've missed anything that they're involved in. I've got a 20-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And all four of them, the baby, not so much because she's the youngest, but my three older kids, especially my oldest, my daughter, she can probably tell you it's 2 times that daddy missed. One time was out of my control because the flight got canceled and I couldn't get home. But the other time, was something that was just a conflict that I probably couldn't miss. Somebody, it was a funeral and, but anyway, so you got to make those deposits. And I think when you make those deposits and you over communicate, you over talk, you over explain, then you got the right mix there. So.
Man, this has been so rich, such a great conversation talking about your call and the craft and the content of your preaching. Man, I got to have you back to talk about Logos, probably just talk about systems and how to be able to work that into from text to sermon. So I'm looking forward to that. But thank you, man, for joining me on this episode.
It was my honor to be here. And if I can just very quickly say this, the sermon preparation doesn't actually start with sermon preparation. It starts with your devotional time. And every preacher needs to be committed to preaching out of their spirit and not just preaching from what they've researched.
That's good. That's good. Well, we appreciate y'all for joining us. We'll see y'all on our next episode. Grace and peace. Well, thank y'all for joining us for this episode of the Preaching While Black podcast. Listen, we need you all to go over to follow the show, to rate and review the show, and make sure that you share it with other Black preachers who need this community. We have a lot of resources for you all on all of our social media platforms at Preaching Black. We also have a website coming, so make sure you look out for that. It'll be here right on the horizon here soon. Grace and peace to you all.
Thanks for listening to the Preaching While Black podcast. For more helpful content and resources, connect with us online at preachingwhileblack.com.